You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I am the host of this weekly podcast about all things Japan. That's right, each and every week, a different guest comes on and talks about different things about Japan. But this week, it's a little bit different. This is one of those rare solo endeavor episodes of the Just Japan podcast, where it is just me, myself, and I, and you, the four of us. That's right. This week, upon request, I'm going to be talking about some of the changes and experiences I've had transitioning from life in Japan after 10 years to life in Beijing, China. So this episode won't be quite as long as other episodes because, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and talk alone all by myself for an hour. But I do have a lot of interesting, points to share, experiences and different things about the transition we've made, myself and my family. I really think that the transition that I've made may be a lot different than other people experience due to the fact that I did make it with a family. So there you go. This evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever you're listening, we're going to be talking about life in Japan versus life in Beijing, China. Now, of course, please remember that the Just Japan podcast can be found all over the place. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, blah, 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 you name it. And of course, the home of the Just Japan podcast is over at justjapanstuff.com, justjapanstuff.com. Go there for podcasts, blogs, and more all about Japan. And of course, you can find me on social media at JLandKev on Twitter. And of course, we got a great snazzy Facebook page that's full of awesome Japanese news. That's right. It's a daily news feed of Japanese goodness over at facebook.com/justjapanstuff. All right, let's get into the interview with myself.
Please hang up and try again.
All right, folks. Okay, so we're here tonight with the Just Japan podcast. And I say tonight because I always record this podcast in the evening once my kids have gone to bed. It was always the same way in Japan, same way here in China. When you have young children, it's just really difficult to do this kind of recording work in your home when they're awake. Because you know what? You close the door to your bedroom and they're just like, hey, Dad, what the heck are you doing in there? We want to be involved. And that can sometimes interrupt interviews. So this week we're going to be talking about life in Beijing versus life in Japan. And this is something that many people have been requesting me to talk about. But because, of course, it is the Just Japan podcast, I don't want to change it into the Beijing podcast or the Just Beijing podcast. I don't have time to do that kind of thing. This podcast is something I focused on for many years. I've got that true, deep Japan connection, having a wife from Japan, kids who were born in Japan. I'm always going to have, like I've mentioned before, I'm always going to have my foot in the door in Japan. I'm always going to be, if I'm not living there, I'm going to be visiting there every year, visiting family, cultural exchanges, blah, 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 blah. Whereas in China, it's somewhere I'm working at the moment, and I'm really enjoying my work at the moment, but it's, we don't have that China connection. You know what I'm saying? Okay, first of all, once we get into, to prelude things with this podcast, I'm not here to complain about China. I'm not here to whine and moan. That's not the purpose of this podcast. So if some people are expecting me to kind of just like get negative about things, I'm not going to do that. But I am going to talk about realities. So there are certain realities. And I don't want you to think I'm slagging and being like a whiner and a moper. I'm just talking about realities. All right, so just want to get that out of the way. So first of all, if you're not familiar with my backstory, if this is something you're jumping into, normally this is not a typical episode of the Just Japan podcast. I normally am not just sitting in front of a microphone by myself. I'm normally interviewing really awesome people who do awesome things in Japan, and I'm hearing their stories often for the first time, and I'm getting excited because I'm learning really awesome stuff about Japan from a very different perspective than the one that I have and the one that I have had. And I think that's the reason, well, no, I don't think, I know that's the reason why I've done 182 episodes of this podcast, because it's me getting to learn from other people who do really interesting things. But, here we are. It's a solo job. Me, you, us, talking together. All right. So I lived in Japan for almost 10 years, pretty close to 10 years. My wife is Japanese. I met her outside of Japan before I came to Japan. She's the reason why I came to Japan. I worked at a school for a long time, and it was professionally, it was time to make a move to push my career to kind of a higher stratosphere. And I'm an international school teacher, which means I'm not an English teacher. I have had experience with teaching English before, but that's not what I do. I'm a professional elementary school homeroom teacher, and I work at international schools. So essentially, I work at schools that teach international curriculums. I'm a full-time homeroom teacher. I'm a generalist. I teach all subjects to the kids. They may be local kids, but often, they're local kids and kids from many other countries. I've got, I think, 10 nationalities represented in my classroom this year where I work in Beijing. It's a really interesting position to be in, absolutely, for sure. And there are schools like the one I work at all around the world. And there are people who are kind of attracted to the international teaching lifestyle. You get often pretty good financial remuneration, some nice packages that take care of you, your family, that make it exciting, accessible, rewarding, and financially viable to move around the world and teach in this kind of international circuit. And a lot of people I've met in my time here basically have made careers of teaching internationally. They spend a few years at one school in one country, and then they move to another country or another school, and they just kind of move around. That's what they do, kind of nomads of the teaching world, and really leading a very interesting life. So we decided to kind of move on, and a lot of interesting job opportunities were offered to me in China. So we gravitated towards a really nice offer here in Beijing. So we came to Beijing, and yeah, so we came to Beijing in August of 2017, and I'm recording this. It's near the end of March 2018. So we're getting near the end of the school year. The school year will finish in June, mid-June, and I will complete my first year as a teacher here in Beijing. So, first of all, let me tell you, the school I work at, I freaking love. Love the school I work at. Love my job. Absolutely awesome. I've got more resources than I've ever had in my life. I've got a lot of freedom to do what I want to do in the classroom and teach the way I want to teach. We have a curriculum. We have a lot of planning meetings, a lot of curriculum meetings. I'm on a team of grade level teachers. We have a team lead. We have coordinators above us, administrators above us who keep an eye on what we do. But at the same time, we have a lot of freedom to be creative in our classrooms and do exciting, innovative learning stuff, which I love. I work with some really professional people, awesome people. So, I really like where I work. Just want to say that off the lead. Just because I don't want you to think I'm whining and moping and stuff. Okay, so here we go. Differences between, Japan and Beijing. And I want to make it a tit for tat kind of thing or this or that, but I want to talk about experiences we had. Now, I came here in 2002 to Beijing as a tourist, as a single man with a few friends, for a few days, and we visited. And I can remember it being quite a bit different than it is now. It was quite a bit chaotic, not quite as orderly. But okay, let's zoom ahead. One thing I definitely have not had, my family and I have not had since we've come to Beijing, we've not had any bad encounters with Chinese people. We've had no truly negative encounters, nothing that's left us angry or bitter, for sure. Mm, we haven't had anyone like yell at us or blatantly be mean to us or push us, or we haven't. And now I know other people have may have had experiences, but we've been only here for a short time, and we don't go out a lot. We're a family with young kids, and we tend to stay close to home a lot. And if we do go out, we're pretty close to home. But when we do ride the train and stuff like that, I mean, we've encountered nothing but hospitality. It's amazing in Beijing, actually. The Beijing metro system is incredibly organized, incredibly user friendly. Everything's in English and Chinese, of course. Um, and there's a really amazing thing, like the people in Beijing, and I think this may be a result of the 2008 Olympics, Summer Olympics that were here. But like every time, no joke, guys, almost every single time we get on a train with our two kids, people get up and let our kids sit down. And these aren't old people; these are like young people. Like you'll see like a 20-year-old woman whack her 20-year-old girlfriend in the shoulder, tell them to get up, and they'll let my 4-year-old and my 7-year-old sit down. And it's just consistent, consistent, consistent. And I have to admit, that doesn't happen in Japan. In Japan, and I'm not slagging, love Japan, lived there for a long time, but people will tend to pretend to be asleep. They'll see people get on who are old, little kids, and people, even young fit people. They just want their chair, and they'll pretend to be asleep, or they'll pretend to be busy and pretend they don't see. And so, hey, kudos Beijing, appreciate that. Um, of course, you do get the curious looks from people, but if you're a foreigner, a visible foreigner, a non-Asian, you look different, and people look, and it's not normally a bad thing, and it's not a negative thing. And of course, they're gonna stare because they're curious, and that happens in Japan too. So, if you get your panties in a bunch because people are staring at you, and you're like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person who's like 6 feet tall, you need to stay home in your own country. Because if you're traveling to Asia, no matter where you are, people are going to look because you're different. All right. So, another thing that really surprised me about Beijing is the availability of foreign food products. It's insane. Mm, like where I live, there are so many import supermarkets. There's nothing like this where, like in Kobe, Japan, or Osaka. Like in my neighborhood within walking distance, there's probably 5 or 6 import supermarkets where you could literally, if you didn't want to eat any Chinese food products ever, you wouldn't have to. You could just buy European and North American food products. And like these are big, they're not little shops, like supermarkets, guys. It's insane. And there's so many of them. Like, now these are expensive. Just let me know. Let you know. So I do shop at these places for some things, but we tend to normally go to the Chinese supermarket to buy a lot of our food products because it's so much cheaper and more affordable. We're not rich. We do okay. We definitely do okay. We're living very comfortably here, but at the end of the day, we do want to save money. We do want to have more money in the bank when we leave Beijing. So we don't always shop at those places. But I mean, there are like in this, like where I live, and there's a very well known chain called Jenny Lou's. There's a shopping mall near where I live called Solana, and inside there's a supermarket called BHG. There's City Mart. There's a lot of Japanese supermarkets around. There's one called Freshness that are around town. So, of course, we're a multicultural family. I'm Canadian, my wife is Japanese. So we'll find ourselves going to all the different import shops and Japanese import shops sometimes to get things. It's really amazing. There's so much. The selection is off the hook. Again, never seen anything like it in Japan. And I lived in Kobe, and I know Kobe is not Tokyo, but Kobe is a very kind of, air quotes, international city, and you can't even compare the amount of international food products. Okay, now, here in Beijing, one thing that gets me down, and if you guys know me, if you follow me on the social medias, on my Twitter, on my Jayland Kev on Twitter, or my teaching account at Mad for Maple, or if you follow me on Facebook and stuff, or if you follow me on YouTube, Boost on Kevin. at Boots on Kevin for any amount of time, you'll know that I'm a huge naturophile who lives in big cities. I'm passionate about teaching conservation to children. I'm passionate about entomology and ornithology. So essentially, I'm a birder and I'm a bug nut. And I'm always walking around with the camera, taking pictures of little critters, birds. I got binoculars. I'm identifying birds. I've got field guides with me, bug field guides. I'm capturing bugs in my hands and putting them in boxes to show my students and letting them go and blah, 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 blah. That was still very doable in Kobe where I lived. Kobe was a big city, but there was still tons of nature around. So it's been a challenge in Beijing. There's a really huge park called Chaoyang Park, not far from where I live, which is also translated into Sun Park, and that was built for the 2008 Summer Olympics here in Beijing. And it is a pretty awesome park, but it's kind of one of those standard, and there were a lot of them in Japan too, over manicured parks where they've got all these big tall trees, but all the underbrush is kept away and like shredded away. So it's just like turf with tall trees. You know, and turf sucks. Nothing can live in grass and turf. That's like not any kind of habitat for little critters. So you get birds around, but there's not a lot of anything else. And it's really hard to find cool stuff as far as bugs and birds. Well, no, actually, Beijing's got a lot of birds. That's one cool thing. Um, but there's just a lack of green space. And, I never lived in Tokyo, and it's probably the same up in Tokyo, I assume. There are some really big and wonderful parks here in Beijing for sure, just not quite where I live in my immediate area. And maybe I was just spoiled where I lived in Kobe, and that's probably the case, that I just had a few really nice parks within walking distance. So I'm speaking to my very specific limited experiences. There's like Olympic Forest Park here in Beijing, which is supposed to be freaking spectacular. Like you can go there and see eagles and stuff. I have not been there yet, but all these involve getting on a subway and getting on, doing some transfers and doing a lot of walking and But at the end of the day, I think when I talk about lack of green space in Beijing, a lack of green space is probably just a very common phenomena, I suppose, and not even a phenomena, a common aspect of life if you live in any major, urban center, any metropolis. So that's a difference. All right, okay, guys, let's talk about weather. Okay, so I lived in Kobe, Japan, and I know that no matter where you live in Japan, weather is something that's a big issue in your life. Weather is something that really affects a lot of aspects of your life, okay? So, like in the spring into the summer, you got typhoon season, and typhoon season is a really big thing if you live down in Okinawa or Kyushu. If you live in Wakayama, occasionally the Kansai region, heck, even Tokyo, typhoons mean a lot. There's a lot of weather. Then you got the earthquakes. Well, that's a whole other thing. Ugh. I lived in Kobe for 10 years. Kobe, of course, has a big history with regards to earthquakes back in 1995 with the Great Han Shinawaji earthquake. But luckily, in all the years I lived in Kobe, there was very little seismic activity that was of any note. But weather is a big thing. It's a huge thing because it's changing all the time. You got rainy season, typhoon season, winter, which where I lived in Kobe is not so bad at all. It almost never snow, and it's not so cold. But here in Beijing, dry, 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 dry. And this year was a special year. So it is now March 27th when I'm recording this episode. We have had one day of precipitation between October 23rd and March 27th. And that was about a week and a half ago. So we went almost 140 days, 145 days with zero precipitation. No rain, no snow. That's insane. And then it snowed for a day. And then 1 week later, it was like 26 degrees. So insane. So, it gets cold here in the winter. You're talking minus 10, minus 15. Windy, very dry. Very dry. Like I said, dry. No precipitation for almost 150 days. So where does that leave you with no precipitation? For me, getting static shocks everywhere I go, touching anything. But what that means is that you need multiple humidifiers in your house going all the time. So in my house, I live in a a 2-bedroom apartment. So we have 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and then a living room / dining room. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms essentially. And we have 3 humidifiers. We get a really big one in our large room. And then we've got 2 other ones in the bedrooms that are essentially almost going 24 hours a day. Without those, it's rough. Like your skin is peeling and itchy. You have chapped lips all the time, or even worse, And we'll get into that. I guess that really connects with the air quality. So, I suppose when you think about people have the stereotype of not a stereotype because not a stereotype, just a reality of Beijing. And I remember before we came to Beijing, we looked at some videos and we heard about the air quality and the kind of like air apocalypse and this and that. And it's just fact, air in Beijing is not good. It's true. It's a very simple fact. And when we got here in August, we talked to a lot of people who have been here for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And the one thing they kept saying is, well, it gets better every year. It's been getting better every year. The Chinese government's been doing a lot more to improve it. The Beijing government's doing a lot more to improve it. And from what we've heard, and I guess you investigate media, the year we've had here so far, yes, it has been a lot better than in the past, and what coworkers have experienced and what Beijingers have experienced, which is great. Fortunate that we have gotten to experience this air quotes better year, but it still sucks. It's not like it's not healthy. And we've had a lot of healthy days. We've had a lot of good air days. So, the one thing that you're really focused on when you're here in Beijing is the AQI, Air Quality Index. And that's the one thing that everyone talks about all the time. Hey, how's the AQI? And good AQI is green. That's 0 to 50. That's nice, healthy air. Okay? So 51 to 100, that's yellow. That's moderate. That's not bad. Okay? When we get to 100 to 150, that's unhealthy. That's orange. Don't like that. When we get to, maybe I'm wrong. Was that moderate? A little. Then it goes to red, which is 150 to 200. That sucks. Over 200, you're purple. Over 300, it's like a dark purple color. But at the end of the day, you got to cope. So you basically you get apps on your smartphone, you get apps on your Android device on your iPhone. Get a few apps. Air Visual is a good one, and you're always checking it, always checking the AQI, because you got to cope. So in your apartment, in your house, you got to make sure, for example, on these high AQI days, that the windows seal well. If they don't seal well, I recommend packing tape. Put packing tape all around the edges of your windows. And of course, everyone has nice air filters or has air filters. If you're moving, you need an air filter. In my 2-bedroom apartment, which I said has 5 rooms essentially, we have 3 air filters, which filter out the PM 2.5, the fine air particulates. These are 3 nice air filters that we paid money for because we want quality. We've got 1 in each bedroom, 1 in the living room. The one in the living room is like the stronger one because it's a bigger room. So we've got the humidifiers and 3 humidifiers in the rooms, 3 air filters, and they're essentially constantly running. So inside our apartment, the air is great, but you gotta leave the apartment sometimes. So if the air quality is great, if it's green, we rip that packing tape off the windows and we open up all the windows and air out apartment, and we're so happy and thankful. And when the AQI goes up, like for example this evening, I just went to the supermarket. It's at 256, which is considered very unhealthy. I wore a mask, and you don't just wear any mask, not the kind of surgical masks that you see people in Japan wearing for yobo. Yobo is like, sickness prevention, or because they don't want to share illness. No, you need more serious masks. And at any 7-Eleven, you can buy some very serious 3M masks. I buy a 3M series mask with a little kind of filter on the side. I pay like about 30 kwai, which is probably offhand, I don't know, about $5 for a pack of 3, and then I can get a few days out of each one if it's bad. And then you're always rotating those, so we're always, you gotta have these good masks. And I always carry one or two in my backpacks, in my pockets, just in case, because the air can change really suddenly. The air quality, it might be really amazing air, and then really quickly it gets bad, and that's all to do with like wind stuff. But on the opposite end, it can be really bad and very quickly get really good. So we got to be just very aware of that. So you guys are like, Kevin, what are you talking about? What are you doing there? Well, okay. I'm not being negative about this. I'm being very practical, okay? Um, so I'm going to go back into the practical side. I have a freaking awesome job, guys. I have a freaking awesome job that is really going to helping my career and going to help my career in the future. So I'm here for a couple of years. I'm making the absolute best of it. We'll see where things go in the future. I love what I do. I love where I work. I've got a great administrative team who support me, great coworkers who support me, and I really enjoy this. Right? And we all go through these challenges together. So just want to say that. So now let's move on to some kind of, health issues. And I've shared this in my Facebook. I've shared this in my Twitter. I've shared it in other places too. But my kids are a bit finicky. They had health problems in Japan in a very nice environmental quality place before we ever came here. My daughter has an anaphylactic peanut allergy, which is a deadly peanut allergy, and when she was born, she had many other allergies. Allergies like that, modern medical science knows, are connected very explicitly to asthma. A lot of people who have food allergies tend to have a likelihood of being asthmatic. My son was also diagnosed as being kind of gray zone borderline asthmatic during his time in Japan. He had a lot of issues with sinus infections and this and that. So we moved here to Beijing, and the peanut allergy has been something we've been very aware of. We all carry EpiPens. Everyone has an EpiPen with them. For my daughter, where we don't order food out very much. One awesome thing is that what's huge and what's the most freaking delicious thing here in Beijing? Freaking dumplings. Dumplings. And those are steamed and they don't use peanuts so we know what we're dealing with dumplings, and my daughter loves them, so we're all set with that. But we got to be really careful about a lot of, like, we can't eat street food and stuff like that because who knows if it's cooked with peanut oil or so we got to deal with that. And then my kids have had some health issues since we've gotten here, and my daughter was diagnosed with asthma recently. She has been officially diagnosed, and she's been having a bit of a rough time lately. So that's something we consider, we think about. But we take very strong precautions, and we're doing our best. And again, this is a remarkable job experience, so we have to really, you gotta really line up the ducks and really think about, okay, short term, long term game, short term game. Short term, it's a little bit rough, but long game, long term, this is gonna help us out a lot. So that's family planning there, family thinking. Okay, so bouncing out of that whole air quality, this and that, internet, guys, internet. A lot of you guys are wondering, the Great Firewall of China, what's going on with that? Yeah, that's something for real, guys. So if you're gonna move here to China to work, before you get here, make sure here's my recommendation. Make sure you get 2 good VPNs. Okay? 2 backups. Don't go cheap, guys. Pay the money. It's worth it. I'm going to recommend, my recommendations will be ExpressVPN and Viper VPN. Those are my 2 recommendations, okay? Those are ones that have worked very well for my wife and I. We have ExpressVPN and Viper VPN on all of our devices, our computers, and our phones. And if you got yourself a modern MacBook or a laptop that can hook up an HDMI cable to, you got yourself a Netflix account back home. You definitely can plug that in, buy a TV, plug that into your TV that's has HDMI capability, and you can watch your YouTube videos and your Netflix and all that stuff. But it's really finicky, and you're often having to bounce from server to server. You're just always dropping. So it can get frustrating, but it's doable. Like if you're into Twitter and Facebook and stuff, like you can definitely use it. It's manageable. Line, all that stuff is manageable, but it's finicky, and you can find like you'll be using it, and all of a sudden the VPN just drops, and when there's special political events happening in Beijing, like special dignitaries visiting and stuff, they make it harder even for the VPNs to work, and they drop more. So it's that's a reality. It's a struggle, but get install the VPNs before you come here. There's my suggestion. Yeah. So life in Beijing, it is different. It's a challenge, but it's an adventure at the same time, guys. And I'm not going to look at this in a negative way. I'm going to Beijing. There are definitely downsides to things here. I love Japan. I think Japan is amazing. Of course it is. Just as in I think Canada is amazing. My home country. Japan and Canada are basically my two homes. I mean, I grew up in Canada. I lived there in my early adulthood, and then most of the rest of my adulthood I spent in Japan, where I got married and I started raising a family, and so these are my two homes. So I think no matter where I go in the world, I'm definitely always going to be with a magnifying glass comparing them to Canada and Japan, being like, I don't know, are they good enough? But I think my family and I are definitely glad we made the jump, because that was a very important jump for my career and my family's future. Financially, professionally, all the whole 9 yards. Has it been bumpy? Yep. Yep, definitely. It's been bumpy. Have we had some rough spots? Yeah, definitely. But we've had other rougher spots in life in different ways. So tomato, tomato, potato, all of that stuff. Overall, are we glad we made the move? Yeah, we are. I'm glad I'm working where I am. I'm glad I'm getting the experiences I am. I'm so happy my children are going to the school they go to. My wife is now working and getting great job experience as well. Now, the air quality, the dryness, that's not great. But that's not the fault of my employer. And, we did make the choice to come here knowing that things might not be perfect. But we're coping as best we can, And when time comes, we will move on to other adventures and other opportunities. But our Beijing experience, our Japan experience, our Japan life, very different. And it's really cool as a family that we're gonna have this experience to look back on when we move on to another place, and that we have these adventures and the challenges that brought us closer together. So there is always something positive you can look at in spite of things. Yeah. So there you go, guys. Wow, that's like I've been talking to you guys for over 30 minutes all by myself. Well, I'd like to thank myself for taking the time to stop by the Just Japan podcast. No, I won't do that. Okay. But guys, so thank you so much for listening to this solo endeavor episode of the podcast. Cheers for downloading it. Cheers for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or the iTunes Store. Thank you so much for saying some kind words. I know you're going to stop by, write a few things about the podcast because you like it. Also, thank you so much for following me on social media at JLandKev on Twitter, at JustJapanStuff.com, and of course at Facebook.com/JustJapanStuff. That does it for another week of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan, wherever you are in the world. Hope you're happy. Hope you're healthy. I'll be talking to you real soon. All right, folks, so I recorded this podcast on the evening of March 27th. Now it's the 28th. I just wanted to add this on at the end. I'm just using the built-in microphone on my MacBook to record this part. But there is a huge dust storm that has blown in from the Gobi Desert, covering most of northern China. And right now, we're in school. My kids, my students are in a specialty class, so they're not here. I'm in my classroom. Windows sealed up tight. I've got one window that is able to open, but I actually put like a packing tape around the edges. air purifiers on, and the AQ outside, AQI, is now about 1,700, which is insane. And basically, it's just yellow outside. So it's an indoor day for sure. And there you go, huh? Living the adventurous life, folks. Living the adventurous life. All right, so thanks for listening. You're all awesome. Thanks for downloading this episode. You rock. Later. Talk to you next week.